Hello and welcome to Ligature Valley, a type design critique podcast for designers who want to think deeper than the algorithm. I'm your host, Caleb Dean, and each week I break down typefaces, both new releases and custom commissions, using a clear rubric that looks at originality, craft, functionality, and cultural impact. Today we're going to be looking at a typeface that hit my inbox this week by Grilli Type, GT Era. Now, I love a lot of the work that Grilli Type does, but sometimes I think their cultural impact and the intersection of where that work is going to live gets really messy or really interesting, and I think they're flirting with the line on purpose. Today with GT Era, we're going to break it down, fit it in that rubric, and talk about how it all works. So per their newsletter and the landing page, Grilli Type's GT Era is a contemporary Grotesque, which is a sans serif family that intentionally invokes the warmth and quirks and texture of early 20th century Grotesque type designs, while of course doing a thing that Grilli Type likes to do, which is equip them with modern flexibility. Their landing page, their site, emphasizes that this isn't a revival or a replication, but rather an echo across time, which is a kind of a nice way to put it. The concept is to channel the character and irregularities of early Grotesques without simply copying them. They also harken back to a lot of wood type production. GT Era is offered in both display and text styles, has extremes along optical size and axes across multiple weights and with slant and oblique versions. The optical axis, of course, especially allows design to adapt for utility, readable at small text sizes, or expressiveness, display context. Of course, without sacrificing, or at least attempting to do without sacrifice, the distinct characteristic of the typeface design. On the development side, credit where credit is due. Thierry Blancpain, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, please send me a message if I'm not, and production by Grilli Type with Christophe Koberlin is really who brought this typeface to life. The site emphasizes a balance of precision with intentional irregularity. The irregularities are supposed to balance out some systematic challenges, which is pretty true along what we're seeing in modern type design. With some context out of the way, we're going to do a quick scroll through the landing page. Now it starts and it's this really beautiful, frictionless, animated, like as you scroll, things come in, buzzwords are hitting the screen. The world is a cold place, and that's why we designed Era. Its weight, it has optical size, it has slants, and it has a really lovely landing page, which we're sort of coming to expect from bigger type design agencies with type projects that they're hoping covers a large landscape of projects that designers are going to love. So right away, we open up to the sort of idea of wood type and this like really neo-grotesque typographic layout, details on the fonts, and then again, some more really wonderful animations of tools coming together. And I think that it started to make more sense to me, this era idea, when they put together this phrase, tools of an era, like thinking about the tools that go into type design. I know that the people at Grilli Type and some other foundries that are pretty close geographically are all thinking about similar things. I'm sure they have garden parties and talk about all this stuff together. But we can see in the breakdown of the typeface and how they're sort of developing things that they're thinking about gridded systems and how the nuance and warmth of woodblock typesetting comes into a new digital era of sorts. Speaking of, there's now a line that says tuned up for now, and it's pulling in more gears, more measurements, the precision idea, and some beautiful animations that go along with it, from opening apertures or calculating counters to the way that they're cutting the terminals so that there's consistency but a friendliness and an openness about it. At the time of this recording, it really feels like this is an era of typeface that is being published, being produced. It really feels of now. I think that more and more type design is trying to hold on to that neo-grotesque feeling without the feeling of sterileness, of sterility. Not sure if that's a word. If it's not, we just made it up. But more and more type designers are looking at these kind of ways of bring some humanity to their typefaces. And I think that's just a reflection of what brands are trying to do and what the end case user of these sort of typefaces are trying to do. When we think about the commerce of type design, they're trying to build a tool that the designers are asking for. So the brand designer, this isn't specifically for one company. So they're trying to get this into the hands of many companies, which is through designers first, designers are speaking to their clients and their clients are asking for something that answers the question better than what's currently on the market. And so the sort of trickle down of going from client to designer to type designer to cultural listener is why we're sort of seeing more and more of these typefaces that feel humane. They have a humanist feel. There's some nuances and tendencies that feel really nice. And I think that this one so far reflects it really, really beautifully. So let's start breaking down the categories of our rubric. First, we'll start with originality and novelty. And like I said before, they're not calling this a revival or a redraw. They're calling it an echo across time. And I think that's sort of a way to distance themselves from that revival or the redraw and try to push into more originality. And I think that's sort of true, but it's also this like aggregate of things that we're seeing in typefaces that are becoming popular. The sort of outstrokes that we're seeing on the lowercase a and lowercase t, the lowercase r, the way that those terminals are happening, we're starting to see more of that sharpness and the revitalization of humanist fonts. Big brands are starting to do it, like we've seen it in Spotify Mix and we're seeing it in Walmart Sans. And so I think there's a move towards just tweaking it a little bit so that it feels like it would have taken a hand to draw it instead of just a computer. I think that that's not necessarily original. I do really love the weight distribution in the lowercase s. I think lowercase s's are always so tricky and so difficult. But the way that they've drawn their lowercase s, especially in the heavier weights where it gets more exaggerated, you can see that the spine sort of has more weight and sits back almost a little bit. And I think that sort of backwards feel, the backwards gait, it's almost like a backwards pelvic tilt, really like lets that S rest in that spot. But then also the like double terminals of the S almost being parallel, sort of the same direction instead of like normally one is one direction and one is the other. Is that true? I guess they're always sort of parallel, right? But instead of being super sharp, I guess the lowercase f is a really great like nuance or a distinguishment between the capital S and the lowercase s. The lowercase f beak sort of points forward as if it's like leading into the next character, and the capital S and even the lowercase s, that beak points inwards towards the S, almost containing the shape a little bit more. Along that theme, the lowercase a, f, and r, all of those, and even t, all of those terminals, there's sort of outstrokes from those letters, are like pointing into the next one, which feels a lot more like a hand dragging when we're writing it. Now that may be more in the design and craft category of our rubric, but it's something to think about when we're dealing with the originality or novelty of these typefaces, is that the nuances do make a lot of difference. So on originality or novelty, it's not a 25 out of 25 for sure. It is probably high 20s. Maybe I'll write this down so I can remember it. When I think about specifically this typeface and how original it is, that there's not a ton of it going on. I think that it's Grilli Type's bid towards just a like subtle degree of difference in their catalog and offering something that everybody is sort of jumping on board with, hoping to appeal to the masses. So I think 17 or 18 here, where there's really lovely nuances in the characters and the system that they've built for it. So that's like more original. I think just like the caliber of that originality is nice, but the typeface as it stands on its own isn't like horribly original. So somewhere high mid, we'll say 17 out of 25 on originality. Next, to talk about design, craft, and aesthetics. I've sort of been talking about this as we've been going to sort of figure out the originality, but the craft of it is gorgeous. Like, it's really beautifully made. You really don't miss when it comes to their craft, and the aesthetic feels really uniform throughout the whole typeface. I do sort of wonder about the nuanced forms and the more humanist feeling forms when we're looking at letters like a lowercase a, s, or e, and they have a nice humanity to them. Even the lowercase t, like he feels kind of heavy in that bottom bit. But then I always wonder a little bit about the O's. I think O is such a tough letter because there's so little information, but there's also so much systematic information in it that when it feels so calculated, it detracts a little bit from that humanity. And so when I see like O and A together, especially if I type it out, you smack a bunch of them together, it's really tough to pair these things together where one feels natural and hand-drawn, but then the other is like super geometric. And that's probably the tension that's happening in this ecosystem of type design, just like how do we pull humanity into neo-grotesque fonts? And this is something that I think a lot of type design founders are going to be working on for a long time, because there's no real clear answer and there's no right or wrong answer. It does come down a lot to opinions. So craft-wise and aesthetically, I think that the craft is really top-notch. Aesthetics, some of the things are a little too tight for me. The way the C has a really tight aperture in the heavier weights, it gets maybe a little bit too close for me to the O's, but that's also like a subtle, nuanced opinion. I don't draw, let's see if I'm writing something. If I write the word occasion, I have really open apertures in my handwriting, so I think there's a preference to more open C's than they're drawing. That's such a subtle detail. Design and craft, we're going to go pretty big here. 22 out of 25. The next category we're going to rank them through is functionality and usability. I don't think it's going to get much better than this one. This is going to be our meter, our bar of usability and functionality. Quickly zipping up to the top of the page again, looking that there's the fact that there's a text family and a display family gives you usability across two very different use cases of the typeface, display and text. And then given that it's a variable axis through optical sizes, weight, and slant is also something that's hugely applicable. It means that you can set any sort of optical size and variance that you might want. You can pick from, what is it going to be, 800 different weights, technically speaking, and 7 different slants. That's going to be an enormous volume of options that people can use. And when you multiply that by the character set that it's coming with and the language variability, of course, it's not yet in any sort of non-Western language. It's very Latin-based. There's no characters outside of Latin script or predominantly Latin script. So it does only cover that, 30% of the world that speaks a Latin language, maybe probably more. But this is also the case, the release case that we're seeing from most of these foundries, which is release them in predominantly Latin languages and then expand them into languages with different characters, because there's so many more thousands of characters to draw. And it's a commercially driven release order, right? Is it going to be effective? Are big brands going to use it? How many people are going to use it? Do people even like it? And then after sorting those things out, expanding it, giving it more functionality across languages and demographics. And from a Western perspective of commerce, that makes a lot of sense, especially that's who they're selling to. If they were, selling in a country where Latin-based languages were secondary, then it would make no sense. And I imagine that happens in reverse in those contexts as well. So functionality and usability, it's got to be through the roof. I probably have to give it a 24 out of 25. 25 being that it is released in not Latin characters, but that would be a huge undertaking for an initial font release, and I don't really expect that of many type design foundries. Now, before we get into the next 2 sections, I just want to remind you that the audio portion of this episode is available wherever you listen to podcasts. But if you'd like to see what I'm actually scrolling through and talking about, letterforms, spacing quirks, brand applications if they've got them, and of course all the visual nuance, you can subscribe for just a few dollars a month at www.ligaturevalley.com. And so lastly, we're going to talk about the contextual and cultural impact of this typeface. My initial reaction is that it's going to score pretty low. I think that this is a typeface added to a catalog for the purpose of commerce. To be really practical and reach an audience who is already looking for typefaces like this, but sort of starting to get tired of the ones that currently exist. So this one is beautifully made, and it fits inside of a demographic and right on the edge of custom type design projects for big brands and really nuanced typefaces that are really interesting but don't fit the mold or aren't quite large enough to have the impact that some smaller, like a Gumroad type design font, might put out. There are some really beautiful typefaces on Gumroad, don't get me wrong, but many of them are done independently and don't have the breadth or technical execution that a foundry like Grilli Type have. So this typeface really feels like it's filling a void in their catalog. And there's, always so much that goes into conceptualizing a typeface, especially if your whole livelihood revolves on, or, is based off the backbone of selling typefaces. At the end of the day, you have to design typefaces that sell. So with GT Era, I think they're really thinking about what people are buying, what their offering is in their Type Foundry catalog, and where they can make new content and develop new forms that are going to help them continue to drive the engine forward. These are sort of like necessary evils that I think Type Foundries have to have. Like, you have to have a commercial backbone that funds your other more culturally impactful fonts. That to say that I don't think this is going to be a hugely culturally impactful typeface. I think that the culturally impactful spots where this typeface would fit are already being occupied by similar typefaces that people aren't going to change. They're not going to pay the price tag that Grilli Type is asking for in order to change something that they are already occupying. I do think that the new organizations who are trying to follow the first 10 or 13% of the market are going to look really heavily at Grilli Type because it will be executed better, because you can say with a little more assuredness that it's crafted really well. But culturally, I think that space is already occupied by other typefaces. What I do think this is an indicator of is an acknowledgement that these big brands are looking for more humanism in their typefaces. We're seeing it more and more frequently with Amazon and Walmart and Spotify, all these brands that were once like so corporate and so buttoned up are trying to come back down to earth a little bit. And a type foundry like Grilli Type making this type of typeface, how many times can I say type, is an indicator that more and more businesses that are just a few tiers below that are looking for this kind of typeface. And again, the assuredness that it's going to be technically perfect, technically excellent, maybe is a better way to say it, but has that sort of fun, happy-go-lucky, we can be friends together feeling. So culturally, it's going to be mid-tier or pretty low. I think under half, maybe a 12 or 13. We'll probably go 12. 12 is my instinct here. So we'll review and we say we have originality at a 17, design and craft at 22, functionality at 24, cultural impact at 12. For you math nerds out there, that's a quick 75 points, which is a C+. That feels really good. I think that feels really good. C+? No, just a solid C. That's probably actually really harsh. When you think about it like that, it's like really bad. But the point of the podcast and the point of this style of critique is to think more about the cultural impact and how original it is and what it's going to add to the catalog of designers, more so than is it technically beautiful. Because, yeah, it is. We have the design and craft and the functionality scores crazy high, and the other two that come down a little bit. And then this is what makes type design so interesting to me, is the overlap and necessity for commerce that comes behind it. So we'll chalk this one up to a typeface that has to add more to the commercial catalog of Grilli Type than to the cultural catalog of Grilli Type. It reflects a little bit of the scenario that they're in. It reflects a lot of the scenario that we're in, and that sort of third tier client designer, type designer. It reflects a lot of that middle tier of designers and what we're looking for as a reflection of what brands and clients are looking for. All of those things are sort of trying to funnel up, and Grilli Type is putting this typeface out as a way to answer that question and answer that need in the market. So thanks for listening to this episode of Ligature Valley. If today's critique gave you something to think about or a font to reconsider, maybe you consider this one now. Consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to go deeper, see the visuals, and support the work, the extended video version is just a few dollars a month, again, at www.ligaturevalley.com. Your support keeps this show independent, ad-free, and rooted in thoughtful, long-form design critique, even if I do ramble a little bit. Until next time, keep your eyes sharp and your mind sharper than these terminal strokes.